People are tired of this. They're tired of $5-gallon gas and $6-gallon diesel. And fertilizer we can't afford to put on our fields in Kentucky. That's not a Democrat. That's not some liberal activist or anti-war protester. That's Rep. Thomas Massie, a Republican from Kentucky, explaining why he voted against his own president's war on the floor of the United States House of Representatives. And yesterday, June 23, 2026, the United States Senate followed suit, passing a bipartisan war powers resolution directing Trump to remove American forces from hostilities with Iran by a vote of 50 to 48. This is the 10th time Congress has voted on this war since it began in February. The 10th. Let that number sit with you. Not once, not twice, 10 separate votes over nearly 4 months. A Republican-controlled Congress repeatedly trying to pump the brakes on a war that the President of the United States launched without asking anyone's permission. And every single time, Trump ignored it, insulted the people who voted against him, and kept the war going. Let's go back to the beginning, because the constitutional question at the heart of this story is one that affects every American regardless of how you feel about Iran, and it's been getting buried under the day-to-day drama of ceasefire announcements and Swiss mountain resort talks. Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution assigns Congress, not the President, the right to declare war. That's not an opinion. That's the actual text of the document. The last time Congress formally declared war was at the beginning of World War II, when Franklin Roosevelt asked for it and got it. Since then, presidents have gradually expanded their unilateral war-making power, using their authority as commander-in-chief to launch military operations without a formal declaration. Vietnam, Korea, Iraq, Afghanistan, all of them started without a congressional declaration of war. CBS News Congress tried to fix this in 1973 with the War Powers Act, a law that says a president can commit American forces to hostilities for no more than 60 days without congressional authorization. 60 days. After that, either Congress approves the war or the president has to end it. That's the law. It's been on the books for over 50 years. Trump launched Operation Epic Fury. That's the actual name they gave this war on February 28, 2026. The 60-day deadline under the War Powers Act arrived on May 1st. At that point, Trump had two options: get congressional authorization or end hostilities. He did neither. Instead, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth argued that the 60-day clock reset when Trump announced a ceasefire in April. A novel argument, meaning one that nobody had ever made before. One that essentially says a president can restart the clock on his own war powers whenever he wants by announcing a temporary pause in fighting. Legal experts called it exactly what it is, a creative workaround with no basis in the actual text of the law. Fox News, and while that legal argument was being constructed, the war kept going. Strikes continued. American soldiers kept dying, 13 total by the time a MOU got signed. The Strait of Hormuz stayed disrupted. Global energy markets stayed in chaos. And the House and Senate kept voting, over and over, with slowly growing bipartisan support, to tell the President of the United States this war needs congressional authorization. You don't have the legal authority to keep doing this on your own. When the House passed its version of the resolution on June 3, 215 to 208, with 4 Republicans joining Democrats, Trump went on Truth Social and called those 4 Republicans grandstanders. Not wrong, not misguided, not mistaken about the law. Grandstanders, men and women who took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States and voted according to that oath, were dismissed as political performers by the president they were trying to hold accountable. Fox News Rep. Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, one of the 4 Republicans who voted yes in the House, put it simply: there's a law on the books. I don't see what's complicated about it. Bring it to Congress, debate it on the merits, and have this vote. That's the way the system is supposed to work. Fox News, that's it. That's the whole argument. There's a law. Follow it. And a sitting Republican congressman had to defend that position against attacks from his own president. Yesterday in the Senate, 4 Republicans crossed the aisle. Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, Susan Collins of Maine, Rand Paul of Kentucky, and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. These aren't fringe figures. Cassidy is the same senator who said this war was the worst foreign policy blunder in decades. Collins has been a consistent voice for congressional oversight. Rand Paul has been a libertarian critic of executive war powers for his entire Senate career. And Murkowski represents a state where military spending matters enormously, but so does the rule of law. 4 different senators, 4 different reasons, one clear message. This war was not authorized, and we are saying so on the record. CAFE Health News Senate Majority Leader John Toon, who voted against the resolution, told reporters he expects Congress would have some sort of vote if the Trump administration strikes a final deal with Iran. He said nuclear components of the deal could trigger congressional notification requirements. Even the man who voted against the War Powers Resolution is acknowledging that Congress has a role to play in whatever comes next. That's how far the ground has shifted. The Senate Majority Leader is preemptively telling the White House, "Don't think you can sign a final Iran deal without us." News Nation, now let's be honest about the limits of what happened yesterday, because this was a symbolic vote. The concurrent resolution will not be sent to Trump's desk and won't become law. It doesn't force an immediate change in U.S. policy. It doesn't pull a single American soldier out of the Persian Gulf. If Trump decides to ignore it, and based on everything he's said and done, ignoring congressional pushback is his default setting, he can. He almost certainly will. KFF Health News, but here's why symbolic isn't the same as meaningless. This was the 10th Senate vote on an Iran war powers measure since the beginning of the year. Each one has gotten a little more bipartisan support. Each one has cost the administration a little more political capital. Each one has put more Republican senators on record expressing frustration, doubt, or outright opposition. And Rep. Gregory Meeks, the Democratic sponsor of the House resolution, said flatly after the Senate vote, "Regardless of what President Trump says, this measure is binding under the War Powers Resolution, and I will explore all legal avenues to ensure the executive complies with the will of Congress." News Nation, legal avenues. That's not just messaging. That's a congressman signaling that the next step might be courts, that someone might actually try to enforce the War Powers Act against a sitting president in federal court, which would create a constitutional confrontation unlike anything this country has seen in decades. Here's the bigger picture that I want you to hold on to. America hasn't formally declared war since 1941. For 85 years, presidents have been fighting wars in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Iran, without asking Congress for permission. The War Powers Act was supposed to be the guardrail. It hasn't worked. Presidents from both parties have found ways to stretch the 60-day window, argue that it doesn't apply, or simply ignore it and dare Congress to stop them. Trump's argument in this case that his war powers clock reset because of a ceasefire is one of the most aggressive expansions of executive war power we've ever seen. If it stands, if no court challenges it, and no Congress successfully enforces the War Powers Act against him, it means any future president can launch a war, call a temporary ceasefire whenever the 60 days run out, restart the clock, and continue indefinitely. Forever, without ever asking the American people's representatives for permission. That's not a partisan concern. That should worry every American regardless of which party you support, because the next president who benefits from this precedent might not be one you voted for. Power claimed by one president doesn't disappear when he leaves office. It gets handed to the next one. And the next one. Forever, 13 Americans died in a war that Congress never authorized. Hundreds more were wounded. Billions of dollars were spent. Global energy markets were disrupted for months. And the entire time, the people's representatives, the men and women elected to speak for you, were holding vote after vote after vote, trying to assert the most basic constitutional principle, that in America, we don't go to war without the consent of the governed. 10 votes. And still the war went on. That's not a Trump story. That's an American story. One that's been building for 85 years, through administration after administration, through war after war. Each one chipping a little more away from the constitutional design that's supposed to keep any one person from having the power to send Americans to die without answering to anyone. If you think Congress should have the power to say no to a president's war, share this video. Drop a comment should the War Powers Act be enforced in federal court, because if Congress can't stop this, the only option left is the courts. And that fight might be coming faster than anyone in Washington wants to admit.